The CNN studio fell into a deathly silence. Karoline Leavitt, the 27-year-old White House press secretary, had just uttered something so audacious, so jaw-dropping, that even the seasoned host, Daniel Harper, sat stunned across the polished table. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's eyes burned with a fury so controlled it sent chills through the room. What unfolded in the next 30 seconds would ignite the most electrifying political moment of the year, leaving Leavitt utterly dismantled on live television. The spark that lit this fire? Leavitt had just implied that certain communities lacked the cultural readiness for federal programs. She had no inkling that Crockett held evidence, devastating, irrefutable evidence, that would expose her hypocrisy in a way that would echo far beyond the studio. The stage was set for a monumental clash between two formidable women. Each embodied a starkly different vision of America. On one side was Karoline Leavitt, the youngest press secretary in White House history. Hailing from New Hampshire, she was the polished face of the administration, known for her razor-sharp tongue and unyielding loyalty to her cause. At 27, she exuded the confidence of young, conservative America, blonde, poised, and utterly convinced of her own moral clarity. Yet tonight, she faced an opponent who would not be swayed by her usual tactics. Across the table sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett from Texas, a 43-year-old former civil rights attorney who had carved out a reputation as one of Congress's most fearless voices. Unlike politicians who measured their words with caution, Crockett spoke truth to power with unapologetic precision. Her years as a defense attorney had honed her ability to dismantle adversaries with cold, hard facts, and her time in Congress had only sharpened that blade. She was a force, unyielding and unafraid. The stakes were colossal. This wasn't just another Sunday morning debate on CNN's State of the Union. It was a battle for the soul of American discourse, unfolding at a time when racial tensions simmered dangerously close to the surface. Leavitt had been making increasingly brazen statements about cultural differences and community readiness, phrases many recognized as thinly veiled dog whistles. Crockett had been watching, waiting, and amassing her arsenal. Tonight, she was ready to unleash it. Daniel Harper had brought them together to discuss the administration's new Community Preparedness Program, a policy that allocated federal aid to neighborhoods based on so-called cultural evaluations. Critics branded it discriminatory. Supporters called it pragmatic. But no one knew that Crockett possessed internal documents that would rip the program's facade wide open. The studio's tension was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Leavitt sat with her trademark smirk, radiating confidence, certain she could handle whatever this congresswoman threw her way. She had faced hostile reporters, survived congressional grillings, and become the administration's most trusted voice. She was untouchable, or so she thought. Crockett, meanwhile, sat composed, her eyes locked on her opponent, studying her like a chess grandmaster plotting a checkmate. The segment began predictably. Harper lobbed gentle questions about federal spending priorities. Both women delivered their rehearsed talking points, Leavitt on government efficiency, Crockett on equitable investment. To viewers at home, it might have seemed like another dull political sparring match, destined to fade into the Sunday morning ether. But those familiar with Jasmine Crockett knew she was playing a deeper game. While Leavitt performed for the cameras, touting smart governance and strategic investments, Crockett was biding her time. The folder beside her chair wasn't mere stage dressing. It held the fruits of months of relentless investigation. As a former defense attorney, she knew that victory didn't come from theatrics or clever quips. It came from evidence. Unassailable, devastating evidence that stripped away spin and laid bare the truth. She had spent weeks building an airtight case, and now she was ready to deploy it. Leavitt, oblivious to the storm brewing, radiated the overconfidence that had become her hallmark. Her meteoric rise from campaign staffer to White House press secretary had convinced her she was invincible. She had outmaneuvered seasoned politicians and weathered media onslaughts. What could one congresswoman do to her on a talk show? Then Leavitt made her fatal error. "Daniel, let's be honest," she said, leaning forward with a self-assured smile. Not every community is ready for the same level of federal investment. Some have stronger cultural foundations, better family structures, greater emphasis on education and hard work. It's not racist to acknowledge reality. Crockett's jaw tightened, but she remained calm. I'm sorry, Karoline, but could you clarify what you mean by stronger cultural foundations? Because that sounds like you're saying some Americans are culturally inferior. Leavitt's smile widened. She thought she had Crockett cornered. I'm talking about measurable outcomes, Congresswoman. Communities with higher graduation rates, lower crime, stronger economic indicators. These aren't opinions, they're facts. Facts, Crockett repeated, her voice low and deliberate, a warning bell in its quiet intensity. Interesting you mention facts, Karoline, because I have some facts of my own I'd like to share. Emboldened, Leavitt pressed her attack, her tone dripping with the condescension that had made her a darling of her base. Look, I know this might be uncomfortable for some to hear, she continued, but we can't keep pouring money into communities that haven't proven they can use federal resources effectively. Some cultures prioritize different things. It's not judgment. It's observation, backed by decades of data. She leaned back, satisfied, believing she'd delivered a masterful blow cloaked in reason. The studio audience, political insiders and journalists accustomed to heated debates, shifted uneasily. A few gasps rippled through the back rows. Even in an era of polarized rhetoric, Leavitt's words crossed a line. Several audience members reached for their phones, sensing a moment that would soon dominate headlines. Harper, a veteran journalist, attempted to steer the conversation back to safer ground. Karoline, that's a bold statement, one many might interpret as, it's not bold, Daniel, it's practical, Leavitt interrupted, doubling down. My family came from nothing in New Hampshire. We worked hard, followed the rules, built something. That's the American way. Not every community embraces those values, and we need to be honest about it. Crockett sat motionless, but her eyes betrayed the storm within. Her hands rested calmly on the table, but her tightened jaw hinted at the fury she held in check. As a courtroom lawyer, she had mastered the art of letting opponents unravel themselves. Leavitt, so sure of her own cleverness, was walking into a trap she couldn't see. Each word, each smug gesture, each patronizing smile was being cataloged by Crockett, who was already calculating how to turn it all against her. The documents in her folder weren't just evidence. They were weapons, and she was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Around the studio, seasoned observers began to sense the shift. This wasn't a debate. It was a predator circling its prey, and the prey was blissfully unaware. So let me get this straight, Crockett said, her voice measured but edged with steel, commanding every ear in the room. You're suggesting federal programs should be distributed based on your assessment of which communities have the right cultural values? I'm suggesting we be strategic about taxpayer dollars, Leavitt shot back, still confident. If that makes me the villain for demanding accountability, so be it. The audience was now riveted, sensing history in the making. Phones emerged, defying CNN's recording rules. In the control room, producers scrambled, directing cameras to capture every angle, every expression. They knew they had television gold, a raw, unscripted moment networks dreamed of but rarely captured. Crockett reached for a folder, her movements deliberate. Well, Karoline, since you're so keen on facts and accountability, I think our viewers will find some documents I obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request very enlightening. Leavitt's confidence wavered for a split second, but she recovered. I'm not sure what kind of gotcha moment you think you're setting up, Congresswoman, but... Oh, this isn't a gotcha moment, Crockett interrupted, her voice now resonating with the authority of someone seizing control. This is a teaching moment, because these documents reveal exactly how your community preparedness program really operates. The cameras zoomed in. Leavitt's smirk faltered. Crockett's gaze was unrelenting, like a prosecutor with a smoking gun. What happened next would be replayed millions of times, dissected by analysts, and etched into political lore as one of the most devastating takedowns in television history. The CNN studio held its breath, as Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett opened her folder with the precision of a surgeon wielding a scalpel. Karoline Leavitt's face, moments ago a mask of smug certainty, now betrayed a flicker of unease. The cameras, sensing the gravity of the moment, tightened their focus on both women. Leavitt's forced smile, Crockett's steely resolve. What was about to unfold would not only shatter the facade of the community preparedness program, but also cement this confrontation as a defining moment in American political history. These documents, Crockett began, her voice steady but laced with righteous indignation, are not rumors or speculation. They're official records obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request straight from the White House Office of Intergovernmental Affairs. And, Karoline, they bear your signature. She held up the first paper, its crisp White House letterhead unmistakable under the studio lights. The CNN camera zoomed in, capturing the official seal for millions of viewers at home. Leavitt opened her mouth to protest, but Crockett pressed on, her tone unyielding. This is an internal memo, dated just weeks ago, outlining how communities are evaluated for your so-called community preparedness program. Would you like me to read what it says about your cultural compatibility scores? The phrase hung in the air like a guillotine blade. The audience, a mix of political insiders and journalists, leaned forward, their earlier unease now replaced by rapt attention. Even Daniel Harper, the season host, seemed frozen, his usual diplomatic instincts overridden by the sheer weight of the moment. Leavitt's eyes darted to Harper, seeking rescue, but none came. She was alone in the arena now. "I'll read it for you," Crockett continued, her voice cutting through the silence. The criteria include English as the primary language, traditional family structures, limited reliance on social services, and, here's the kicker, alignment with traditional American values, as determined by community demographics. She paused, letting the words sink in, her gaze locked on Leavitt, who was visibly paling. The studio erupted in murmurs. A few audience members gasped audibly, their phones already recording despite CNN's strict rules. In the control room, producers were in a frenzy, barking orders to capture every angle. Leavitt's crumbling composure, Crockett's commanding presence, the audience's stunned reactions. They knew this was no ordinary debate. It was a seismic event unfolding live. Leavitt tried to interject, her voice shaky. That's being taken out of context. Those are preliminary guidelines, not out of context. Crockett's voice rose, not in anger, but in controlled, devastating clarity. "Karoline, these are your words, your office's directives. But let's keep going, because it gets better." She pulled out a second document, holding it up like a prosecutor presenting Exhibit B. "This is a scoring sheet for communities evaluated under your program. Guess which areas got the highest cultural compatibility scores? Predominantly white suburban neighborhoods. And guess which ones score the lowest? Urban areas with large Black and Latino populations." The murmurs in the studio grew louder, a wave of shock rippling through the crowd. Several audience members stood, craning their necks for a better view. The energy in the room was electric, as if everyone sensed they were witnessing a reckoning years in the making. Leavitt's hands gripped the table, her knuckles whitening, but she couldn't find her voice. Crockett wasn't done. She reached for a third document, her movements deliberate, her eyes never leaving Leavitt's. "And this," she said, her voice now carrying a quiet fury that made the room feel smaller, "is my favorite. An email chain between your office and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. In it, your deputy writes, and, I quote, 'We need to ensure the money goes to communities that will use it the right way.' We all know what that means." The gasps from the audience were unmistakable now, sharp and raw. Daniel Harper shuffled his papers, his face a mix of disbelief and fascination. Leavitt's composure was unraveling, her eyes wide, her lips trembling as she searched for a defense. "And your communications director's response?" Crockett continued, holding up the email for the cameras. A laughing emoji, followed by, "Karoline will love this." Finally, a way to fund real Americans instead of the usual suspects. The phrase, usual suspects landed like a thunderclap, its implications unmistakable. The studio exploded. Half the audience leapt to their feet, some applauding, others shouting in disbelief. The control room was chaos, cameras swiveling to capture every reaction. The usual suspects? Crockett's voice boomed, her full authority now unleashed. Is that what you call Black and Latino families who need federal support? The usual suspects. She stood, her presence commanding the room, the cameras tracking her every move. Leavitt shrank in her chair, her earlier bravado gone, replaced by a look of sheer panic. Those emails are being misinterpreted, Leavitt stammered, her voice barely audible. We were discussing oversight. Not, stop lying, Karoline. Just stop. Crockett cut her off, her voice ice-cold, each word a hammer strike. You got caught. Your administration built a system to discriminate against communities of color, and you put it in writing. For months, you've been dog-whistling about cultural readiness and community values, thinking you were clever, thinking you could push racist policies without saying the quiet part out loud. But you did say it, didn't you? In your emails, your memos, your official documents. The applause was thunderous now, rolling through the studio like a tidal wave. Audience members were cheering, whistling, some standing on their chairs. Even a few CNN crew members clapped, unable to resist the moment's power. Leavitt looked to Harper, desperation in her eyes, but he was as transfixed as the rest, his usual neutrality abandoned. And the most disgusting part, Crockett continued, turning to the camera, speaking directly to the millions watching at home. You had the audacity to sit here tonight, lecturing me about facts and accountability, while running a program designed to starve Black and brown communities of resources they're entitled to. Her voice carried the weight of history, of every injustice she'd fought as a civil rights attorney, of every community she'd sworn to protect. This, she declared, holding up the documents, is what racism looks like today. It's not hoods or crosses. It's government memos, cultural compatibility scores, and laughing emojis about funding real Americans. But you know what, Karoline? She turned back to Leavitt, her gaze piercing. You're done. This program is done. These policies are done. Because the American people just saw exactly what you think of them. The standing ovation began in the front row and swept through the studio, a roar of approval that shook the room. Leavitt sat frozen, her face a mask of shock and humiliation, the documents spread before her like evidence in a trial. Harper, finally regaining his composure, tried to transition to a commercial break, but the audience's cheers drowned him out. The segment ended, but the moment was far from over. As the studio lights dimmed for the break, the energy didn't fade. Audience members were still on their feet, some hugging, others furiously typing on their phones. Leavitt remained in her chair, staring at the table, her hands trembling. Crockett gathered her documents with calm precision, her face betraying no hint of triumph, only resolve. She had done what she came to do, and the world was already reacting. Outside the studio, the explosion was immediate and massive. Social media ignited like a wildfire, the confrontation crashing trending algorithms within minutes. Hashtags like Crockett Unleashed and Usual Suspects rocketed to the top, capturing the raw fury and brilliance of the moment. The 30-second clip of Crockett standing and declaring, "You got caught," garnered millions of views in the first hour alone, shared across every platform, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and beyond. People weren't just watching, they were engaging. Comments poured in, from ordinary citizens to celebrities, praising Crockett's courage and precision. This is what accountability looks like, one viral post read, shared by a former president. Another hashtag, Receipts Delivered, became a shorthand for exposing truth with evidence, a nod to Crockett's methodical takedown. Memes of Leavitt's stunned face flooded feeds, while Crockett's words were remixed into anthems of justice. The political fallout began almost instantly. By the next morning, multiple congressional committees announced investigations into the Community Preparedness Program. Civil rights organizations filed lawsuits, citing Crockett's documents as evidence of systemic discrimination. Even some administration allies distanced themselves, with a prominent senator stating, "If these documents are accurate, this program is indefensible." Leavitt, meanwhile, faced a firestorm. Conservative media, once her champions, began questioning her viability. Her emergency press briefing the next day was a disaster. Reporters pounced, demanding explanations for the usual suspects, email, and the cultural compatibility scores. Her deflections, preliminary drafts, misinterpreted context only fueled the backlash. Clips of her stumbling responses went viral, nearly as shared as Crockett's takedown. Crockett, by contrast, became a national hero overnight. Her office was flooded with calls and emails, most thanking her for exposing the truth. News programs clamored for interviews, and late-night shows played her clips to roaring applause. Yet she remained focused, redirecting attention to the communities her evidence had protected. "This isn't about me," she told one anchor. "It's about ensuring no family is denied what's rightfully theirs because of their skin color." The confrontation had tapped into something deeper than politics. A hunger for accountability in an era of spin and lies. Crockett's evidence, her courage, her unyielding moral clarity had given people hope that justice could still prevail. But the story was far from over. The investigations were just beginning, and the administration was scrambling to contain the damage. Leavitt's future hung in the balance, and Crockett's star was rising. What would come next would test them both and the nation itself. The dust had barely settled from Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's seismic takedown of Karoline Leavitt, but its shockwaves were already reshaping the political landscape. The CNN studio confrontation had ignited a firestorm, exposing the discriminatory underbelly of the community preparedness program and thrusting both women into the center of a national reckoning. As the investigations deepened and the public's demand for justice grew louder, the stakes for Leavitt, Crockett, and the administration reached unprecedented heights. This was no longer just a debate, it was a battle for the soul of American governance. In the days following the broadcast, the nation remained gripped by the fallout. Social media platforms buzzed incessantly, with Crockett's words, "You got caught," etched into the public consciousness. The hashtags Crockett Unleashed, Usual Suspects, and Receipts Delivered dominated feeds, evolving into symbols of accountability and resistance. The viral clip of Crockett standing tall, brandishing White House documents like a sword of truth, had been viewed over 50 million times by the end of the week. It wasn't just a moment, it was a movement. Crockett's office in Texas became a hub of activity, swamped with thousands of calls, emails, and letters from Americans across the spectrum. Parents, activists, teachers, and even disillusioned conservatives who saw her as a beacon of hope. "Thank you for showing us what courage looks like," one letter read, scrawled in a child's handwriting. Invitations poured in from every major news outlet, late-night comedy shows, and even grassroots organizations begging her to speak at their rallies. Saturday Night Live announced she'd guest host their next episode, a testament to her cultural impact. Yet Crockett remained laser-focused, refusing to let the spotlight distract her from the work. In every interview, she steered the conversation back to the communities her evidence had shielded from discriminatory policies. "This was never about me versus Karoline Leavitt," she told a national news anchor, her voice steady with conviction. "This was about protecting families who've been systematically excluded from the resources they deserve. We caught them putting their bias in writing, and now we hold them accountable." Her strategic restraint only amplified her influence. By emphasizing policy over personal gain, she maintained an unassailable moral high ground, earning respect even from moderates who might have flinched at her confrontational style. Political analysts began comparing her to civil rights icons, noting her ability to blend courtroom precision with moral authority. Progressive groups whispered about her future: Senate runs, cabinet posts, even a place on a presidential ticket. But Crockett brushed off the speculation, her eyes fixed on the investigations now unfolding. Those investigations were moving at breakneck speed. Within a week of the CNN showdown, 7 congressional committees had launched probes into the Community Preparedness Program, each citing Crockett's documents as their foundation. The NAACP, ACLU, and other civil rights organizations filed federal lawsuits, alleging the program violated constitutional protections against discrimination. Legal experts predicted the usual suspects' email alone could cost the government millions in damages for affected communities. The administration scrambled to contain the crisis, but their efforts only deepened the wound. Karoline Leavitt, once hailed as a conservative prodigy, became a lightning rod for criticism. Her press briefings turned into battlegrounds, with reporters, emboldened by Crockett's example, grilling her relentlessly. "Can you explain the Real Americans comment in your office's email?" one journalist demanded. Leavitt's response: "It was a misunderstanding, taken out of context," rang hollow, and the clip of her faltering went viral, racking up millions of views. Conservative media, which had once celebrated Leavitt's sharp tongue, began to turn. Pundits questioned whether her youth and inexperience had become liabilities. Several high-profile donors publicly called for her resignation, arguing she was dragging the administration down with her. Behind closed doors, White House officials reportedly debated her fate, with some urging damage control and others insisting she take the fall to save the broader agenda. Leavitt's public appearances grew increasingly strained. Her trademark smirk was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped expression that betrayed her embattled state. During one briefing, when pressed about the cultural compatibility scores, she snapped, "I'm not going to litigate this in the press." The outburst, caught on camera, fueled a new wave of memes and late-night comedy skits, further eroding her authority. For a 27-year-old who had built her career on being untouchable, the fall was swift and brutal. Yet the broader implications reached far beyond Leavitt's personal collapse. The Community Preparedness Program was suspended pending a Justice Department review, a direct result of Crockett's revelations. That review quickly expanded, uncovering similar discriminatory practices in other federal agencies. New guidelines were drafted to ensure no program could use cultural compatibility or similar criteria to allocate resources. The Justice Department's findings sent ripples through government, forcing a reckoning with how policies were crafted and implemented. The legal battles intensified, too. Civil rights lawsuits gained traction, with Crockett's documents serving as cornerstone evidence. Community leaders from urban areas testified about the real-world impact of being denied federal aid, their stories amplifying the human cost of the program's bias. One plaintiff, a single mother from a predominantly black neighborhood, told a federal judge, "They called us usual suspects, but we're just families trying to survive." Her words, broadcast live, struck a chord nationwide, further galvanizing public support for reform. Crockett's role in sparking this change didn't go unnoticed. Democratic Party leaders, who had sometimes been wary of her blunt approach, now embraced her fully. Senate Majority Leader Sarah Coleman called her a fearless champion for justice, while House Speaker Malik Johnson praised her masterful use of evidence to hold power accountable. Even some Republicans, eager to distance themselves from the scandal, offered cautious praise. A senior senator from the Midwest said, "Congresswoman Crockett's findings raise serious questions that demand answers. All Americans deserve equal treatment." But the true measure of Crockett's impact lay in the public's response. Her takedown became a blueprint for confronting bias in politics. Activists and organizers studied her approach, demanding receipts, refusing vague excuses, and wielding evidence like a weapon. Political strategists across the spectrum analyzed the confrontation, with Democrats seeking to replicate her precision and Republicans warning candidates to avoid putting discriminatory views in writing. "Crockett showed us how to fight with facts," one strategist wrote in a widely shared op-ed. "She didn't just win a debate, she changed the game." The media faced scrutiny, too. Some critics argued that investigative journalists should have uncovered the program's flaws months earlier, rather than leaving it to a congresswoman with FOIA requests. Others praised CNN for giving Crockett the platform, even if it meant one of the most uncomfortable moments in the network's history. Daniel Harper, reflecting on the segment, told colleagues, "I've moderated presidential debates, but I've never seen someone dismantled so thoroughly with their own words." For the American public, the confrontation was more than a political spectacle. It was a catharsis. In an era when many felt politicians could lie with impunity, Crockett had proven that accountability was possible. Her preparation, her courage, her refusal to let coded language slide had given people hope that justice could still prevail. The image of her standing in the CNN studio, holding up government documents, became iconic, a symbol of what democracy could be when someone with power used it to protect the powerless. Months later, the Community Preparedness Program was terminated entirely, its architects reassigned or quietly resigned. The Justice Department's guidelines became a model for ensuring equitable resource distribution, cited in policy schools as a case study in reform. Leavitt remained press secretary for a time, but her influence was shattered. Her briefings became exercises in deflection, with reporters challenging her at every turn. Her once bright future dimmed, her name now synonymous with a scandal she couldn't outrun. Crockett, meanwhile, emerged as a transformative figure. She continued to focus on policy, championing bills to protect marginalized communities and strengthen civil rights protections. Her national profile soared, but she remained grounded, often visiting the neighborhoods her work had impacted. During one such visit, a community leader embraced her and said, "You gave us a voice when they tried to silence us." Crockett smiled, her eyes glistening, and replied, "You always had a voice. I just made sure they heard it." The confrontation's legacy endured, a turning point in how America grappled with bias in government. It proved that systemic discrimination could be exposed and defeated, but only through relentless effort and unyielding truth. As one historian later wrote, Jasmine Crockett didn't just take down Karoline Leavitt. She shone a light on darkness, and the darkness withered. For millions who watched that night, the memory of Crockett's stand lingered. A reminder that when someone calls out injustice with the receipts to back it up, the crowd roars and the world shifts. It was a moment of swift, decisive victory, a promise that the fight for justice could still be won.